Good evening. My name's Jason. I'm one half of the Ironman.
Hello there, everybody. Clearly is the better looking half, and I'm Steve. It's nice to see you.
And today we've got another video to watch. Now, it's a video about what sex was like in the Victorian era.
They were filthy, Jay. Absolutely filthy.
Well, we're going to find
Everyone
out.
knows.
We were. I've not seen it, actually. I've not seen this video. I've recorded it without watching it, so I've got no idea what it's going to be about. And obviously Steve's not seen it either, so we'll go ahead and we'll see what we think.
Let's discuss what sex was like in the Victorian era. Relax and enjoy the video. It's simple to classify the past as an era of prudish and proper behavior, full of religious zealots and patriarchal power grabs, even though that wasn't always the case. Rome, Greece and Egypt have documented instances of both the ruling class and regular citizens participated and openly enjoyed all kinds of wild intercourse. When it comes to Victorian England, the reputation for prudishness and repression was never more correct. Intimate relations in the 1800s was something to be avoided at all costs, and people found bizarre and creative ways to get around doing the horizontal mambo. So then, what kind of preventative measures did people take during this time? Chastity contraptions, religious dogma, and shame were powerful tools in controlling copulation outside of reproduction. Make no mistake, this was a time of repression, and they did anything to keep intercourse out of society.
You would.
It was improper to do it more than 2 times a week. In 1894, Ruth Smithers published a relationship guide. According to her, couples should have intercourse no more than 2 times a week. The wise bride will permit a maximum of 2 brief sexual experiences weekly, and as time goes by, she should make every effort to reduce this frequency. Feigned illness, sleepiness and headaches are among her best friends in this matter. If you dance...
Is that a Victorian thing or is that still modern?
Well,
illness and headaches.
It rolls on, doesn't it? It rolls on into the modern era. Can I just ask something? Who the hell is this bloke? Where is his authority on this?
Right. Well,
Has he just made this up or what? He's not even British.
It's obviously a history program. The other thing I always think about it in the Victorian era is it must have been quite smelly. You know, they weren't as hygienic. They wasn't as hygienic as we are these days.
No.
You danced after having sex.
No,
you wouldn't get pregnant. French physio.
So yeah, no dancing after sex. Not like many people do, really. Most people go to sleep after sex, don't they? Depending what time of day they do it.
Normally, depends where you do it.
Yeah, you do it in the toilets at the local discotheque. You might do a bit of dancing afterwards.
You might.
Psychologist Eugene Beckler developed some helpful advice to share during.
Maybe, yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so it's all good. Yeah. Oh my God! It's all right. Let's have a dance.
Yeah, let's go dancing later. We'll be fine.
The Victorian era in his book Beckler's Physiology.
Spin on come dancing again.
Among his many claims was a series of contraceptive methods, which included having a woman dance around the room right after doing it or riding a horse the next day. Beckler made a number of similar claims that are absurd in hindsight, such as that it's impossible to get pregnant from forced intercourses, and that the personalities of couples determined whether or not they could physically conceive children.
Now, that's sort of true because they used to believe that if a woman didn't have an orgasm, she couldn't get pregnant.
Okay.
So therefore, if a woman claimed she was raped and she got pregnant, she couldn't have been raped because she obviously enjoyed it and must have had an orgasm. You with me?
Oh, I see.
So that's what he said. So he said that women can't get pregnant from forced sex because that's the reason why. There you go.
Since seemingly everyone in Victorian England was repressed in some way, it makes sense repression eventually took on a human form as Mrs. Grundy, originally an off-stage character in Thomas Morton's 1798 play Speed the Plough. In that play, characters fretted about what the very traditional and conservative Mrs. Grundy would think of their actions. Over time, the character's name became shorthand for respectable repression and extreme purity. During the Victorian era, Mrs. Grundy was invoked as a means of controlling desires. There were male chastity devices. Contemporaries of the Victorian era were all about self-control. While women got the brunt of that mentality, men weren't exempt from it. It was thought that if men weren't consumed by sexual desires, they'd have more time to focus on being productive members of society. From this mentality, anti-masturbation devices were born. One specific accessory called the jugum penis was intended to prevent men from engaging in any intentional or accidental self-pleasure. When worn at night, the teeth of the ring would dig into any spontaneous erections, waking the
Ooh.
wearer and encouraging him to compose himself instead of completing any nocturnal emissions. Women were
Wouldn't want that on your
encouraged to find
Christmas
a
list, would you?
bathroom if their partners got
really.
too frisky. For women, sexual intercourse was a necessary step in the process of procreation, and to treat it as anything more than that would bring them down to lower classes. That meant they had to be vigilant in case their husbands started to get frisky. Sometimes, that meant taking drastic actions. In the book Sex Tips for Husbands and Wives, Ruth Smithers gave a vital piece of advice on the matter. If he attempts to kiss her on the lips, she should turn her head slightly so that the kiss falls harmlessly on her cheek instead. If he
Harmless.
lifts her gown and attempts to kiss her any place else, she should quickly pull the gown back in place, spring from the bed, and announce that nature calls her to the toilet. Things became more open and acceptable in the 1890s.
And if she says she needs a number 2, that's definitely going to put him off.
Well, depends, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Some people are into that.
Apparently it's a German thing, isn't it?
German sausage.
If you're German, tell us about it. Yeah. Is that a German thing? I'm sure they have a name for it.
I don't think it's exclusive for the Germans, you know.
They call it caviar or something, don't they? I'm sure they do.
You know way more than I do.
I've
no idea.
I've watched more episodes of Eurotrash than you have.
I call it
There's only so long
turd.
staunchly proper society can be imposed before rigid mores become a problem. Prostitution had always been just beneath the powdered surface of Victorian culture, though they were never openly discussed. By the end of the 19th century, that secret world of underground sexuality flourished in Victorian society. Some believed touching yourself could drive men and women insane. In Victorian times, many believed that self-pleasure led to extreme sickness and physical ailments. Scientific consensus said that self-pleasure was a common cause of insanity. Eventually, a wide variety of sicknesses and conditions were connected to the evils of self-pleasure. Moreover, people who were…
So, you go to the doctors and say, oh, doctor, my knee really hurts. And they go around and say, have you been wanking again?
Well, now
that's going to cut down. That's going to actually, they should adopt that now as a societal thing, because that would cut down on all people going to the doctors unnecessarily. Because if you got accused of masturbating every time you went to the doctors with something, then people wouldn't go, would they?
That's very true. That's
shame them into not going.
That does contradict something that I'd seen as well. And that was, it might have been slightly later than this. And that's where the doctors would actually, because there was no such thing as rabbits. Well, obviously there's a fairy rabbit, but the ladies you couldn't go and buy a vibrator.
Rampant rabbit, yeah.
There was no Ann Summers. But the doctors had an electronic device that was, to all intents and purposes, a vibrator. And when the women used to come in with stress and anxiety and all the other bits and pieces, basically the doctor freaked them off. And
they'd leave feeling wonderful.
Basically, yeah. Yes, absolutely. So that's kind of contradicted, which something that I know that they actually used to practice.
So maybe then if we did have wanking on the NHS, although, if you go in and you get a male doctor, you're going to be really disappointed, aren't you? Unless you're a female, of course. Depends. Yeah.
Pale, overweight, or unhealthily skinny were all thought likely to be involved in self-pleasure. Having children out of wedlock was stigmatized.
Well, we know
While
that.
the rate of illegitimate births was fairly low in the Victorian era, when it happened, it was a significant taboo. In fiction, characters like Hetty Sorrel and Fanny Robin reinforced the reputation of single mothers as tragic, broken women because they got pregnant outside of marriage. A lot of the time, single mothers were so scared of becoming pariahs, they'd leave their newborn children at the front of hospitals. In the worst cases, desperate women killed their newborn babies. Prostitution freaked people out. While in previous eras, prostitution was a profession just like any other, it flew in the face of the social norms that flourished during the Victorian era. It wasn't just because of intercourse, but because prostitutes represented female freedom from the patriarchy. Prostitutes weren't tied to the family unit, so they had social and financial independence other women lacked. As a result, popular culture smeared prostitutes as fallen women in an effort to shame them and discourage young women from following the same path.
I don't know if you've seen Harlots. Have you ever watched Harlots?
No.
That's all about prostitution in Victorian England. But they had again, I don't know how true it is or whether it's just for fiction, but they had some of them had almost celebrity status. You know, in these really market brothels, and they were almost like, and they was really, really, really sought after, almost to be like a paid mistress. I don't know how true that is. Maybe if you're a history buff, let us know in the comments.
Yeah.
And while we're at it, hit the like button, please, and the subscribe button. It really helps our channel, doesn't it, Stephen?
It does, but I still prefer it when you say hit the bell end. I still like that.
Hit the bell end. Give it a good slap.
You
Can we
didn't want
alter
to get
to look
hot,
like a
you
bell
stayed
end?
away from mustard. Since society discouraged doing it for pleasure and the scientific community cited Swiss neurologist Samuel August Tissett's research linking
hang on.
self-pleasure
Was that
with
a bowl of
insanity.
Rice Krispies?
No, that was mustard seed.
No, they're having you on. That was a bowl of bloody Victorian Rice Krispies and some mustard seed in front. You're not gonna want to have sex after that, are you?
Not together.
Victorian men found themselves between a rock and a hard place whenever they felt aroused. To discourage feelings of horniness, men were encouraged to avoid certain foods that supposedly inspired carnal cravings, including mustard, pepper, rich gravy, beer, wine, cider, and tobacco.
That's when you give a woman a hot dog with some mustard on it. That's why they're always trying to deep throat it, isn't it? It makes them aroused.
That is it. Do you know why we say horny, by the way? Did you hear him just say?
Yeah. Why do we say horny?
Well, this goes back to, I'm sure it's a Greek god, Ram. Oh God, blimey! Anyway, he had he was the god of sex, of love, if you like, and he was depicted with a goat's head and enormous big horns.
Oh, I see. So you're horny when you have.
Yeah, that's where we get that from.
Oh.
I'll think of his name in a bit.
Women were seen as either frigid moralizers or fiends. While Victorian men were considered constantly randy entities who were slaves to their biology, women got a somewhat less liberating outlook. There were essentially two kinds of women in Victorian society. The pure and emotionally frigid maiden or insatiable deviant. Women had to stay on the path of chastity as once they strayed, they were forever tainted.
Whoa!
What?
She's like that bloke out of Wild Wild West. The one who's not got any legs or anything. Look, it's half girl, half chair. What's going on there?
I think she's sat on a chair. She's not half girl, half chair. It's
half girl, half chair. Look, with some weird malformed freaking thing poking out from under her skirt.
Police were allowed to arrest prostitutes for having STDs.
So they should.
Though society didn't generally approve of prostitutes, that didn't stop people from soliciting their services. Unprotected intercourse with prostitutes led to an increase in STIs, particularly among the armed forces. So, in 1864, the Contagious Diseases Acts were passed, which gave police permission to detain women they suspected of being prostitutes. While in custody, the women were given an examination to see if they hadn't STI, and if they did, they were sent to a lock hospital for up to 9 months, so they couldn't transmit any diseases to men. As is typical of Victorian society, these measures were passed to protect men instead of women. Men got a free pass to mess around. By the last.
Sorry?
I do hope these graphics get a bit better soon.
I don't think we're going to be anything we're going to get banned for in this one.
Half of the 19th century, it was widespread belief that men were predisposed to hypersexuality because of biological imperative and thus weren't responsible for sleeping with numerous women. Those who disagreed with this notion, mostly women, started a social purity campaign aimed at rectifying the double standard from which men benefited. Instead of trying to give women the same freedoms that men received, though, the campaign condemned intercourse all around. These people were referred to as New Puritans. Homosexuality was illegal. The later years of the Victorian era saw an increase in publicly visible homosexuality, which had been frowned upon in the previous decades.
They used to have something called molly houses, which were like brothels, but the men would dress up as women. So it's kind of like the very early transvestites. But yeah, so I don't know whether that was part of the fact that they wanted to be like women, or whether it was the fact that they could be homosexual, but it was sort of like being with a woman, if that makes any sense. I don't know. But
Molly house, is that what you're
Molly
saying?
houses.
Molly.
Yeah, it's called a molly house. Yeah. Again, got that from watching Harlots.
For a while, there were no explicit legislation against a practice other than public indecency laws, which could easily be avoided. However, in 1885, all gay relations were made a criminal offense, even in private. This legislation led to the imprisonment of Oscar Wilde 11 years later. If both parties didn't climax at the same time, it sucked. When people of the Victoria era did end up getting down, there were a lot of rules attached. One of those rules states that unless a couple climaxed at the same time, then it should be considered a failure. In fact, women were justified in outright refusing doing it if they and their husbands couldn't achieve the orgasm of the woman and the ejaculation of the semen of the man at the same instant. This notion persisted into the 20th century, appearing in books such as The Hygiene of Marriage, published in 1923.
I think that's the last of it. I think that was a lot to do with getting pregnant. Again, I think they believed that unless both parties climaxed at the same time, they couldn't get pregnant. And obviously, the main reason for sex was to have children. So there you go. That's a little bit about sex in the Victorian era. Sorry for the disappointing graphics there, Stephen.
Very disappointing. Very disappointing.
If we did the next one in the modern era, we might have something a little bit better.
Well, I do hope so, if I'm brutally honest with you. So I could have gone and done a more exotic drawing with a blooming crayon and the back of a piece of wallpaper.
Well, next time you can bring that along, and we can react to that, to Steve's artistic etchings with his crayons and wallpapers.
I am going to.
We'll do that. Let's review your video. Yes. Right. Hope you liked the video. Give us a thumbs up. Give us a subscribe and hit the bell. Hit the bell end. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching.
Cheers, everybody. Take care.